Good evening, hello. Tonight's halacha shir is counting a Mechalel Shabbos for Minyan, whether or not you can count, whether the 10th man can be a Mechalel Shabbos. Last week we discussed the 9 plus a child, that was last week's topic. It's connected to this week's parsha from a Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara in Brachos says, how do you know that you need 10 people for a Minyan? Because it says, V'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. Kol dover shebikdusha lo yehei pachos me'asara. Any dover shebikdusha cannot be less than 10 people. Now, how does that work? The Gemara says over there, we make a gzeir shava. Osya teich teich. Ksiv hacha, it says, v'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. Every dover shebikdusha has to be b'soich b'nei Yisrael. And it says, hibodlu, in this week's Edra, hibodlu mitoich ha'eda hazais. Stay away, separate yourselves from this Eda. Now, in last week's Sedra, we know that an Eda was 10. So you've got, because it says that the Eda in reference to the Meraglim, that was 10. So therefore, when it says, Hibodlim mitoicha Eda hazos, that means 10, because of Eda. And then you've got a Gzeir Shava of Teich Teich, just like it says, Hibodlim mitoicha Eda, which is 10. So V'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael is also 10. So therefore, that's the source that a Dovish of a Minyan has got to be with 10. So that's why we spoke about Minyan last week, 9 plus a child, and that's why it's this week is Mechalel Shabbos, whether he can count for a Minyan. So that is the connection to the parsha. Now, we mentioned last week because the power of Tefillah b'tzibur, Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah Perek Ches Halacha Aleph, Tefillah HaTzibur Nishmas Tomid, the second box, Afilu Hoye Bohen Chaytin, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mayes B'Tefillah Shel Rabbi. So it seems from the Rambam that even if there are chaytim in your Minyan, you can actually count them. But we're going to see them more specifically. The Shulchan Aruch says in Orchaim Siman Nun Hey Sif Aleph, Omrim Kaddish ve'ein Omrim Osei Pachos Miyud Zucharim B'nei Chorin Gedolim. For a Minyan, you need 10 adult males. Fine. V'hu adin l'kedusha o baruch hu she'ein ne'emorin b'pachos me'asara. Then in Sif Yud Aleph, a little later on in that Siman, Shulchan Aruch says, box number 4. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. The Shulchan Aruch says, Avarion she'ova al gazer satzibur. An avarion means someone who does averas. A person who does averas and he is over al gazer satzibur, or he violates certain communal decrees, she'ova avera, im lo niduhu, unless they actually put him in cherem, nimna lemin asara. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch says, unless he's done something so grave that he's been put in cherem, he can join the Minyan. Now the Mishnah Berurah qualifies this, and this is important. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sifkot and Memvav, Oy she'av avera, kosav ha-Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says, Dafka avera she'ava l'te'ovein. What type of avera can we include? Has this guy violated that we can include him? An avera which is l'te'ovein. Now we know there are 2 types of averas. There's an avera which is l'te'ovein. Just you succumb to your temptation. For example, you've got a weakness for cheeseburgers. So, you're a good from Jew, but this is your area. This is what you find difficult. And you do it not for theological reasons, not lahachis, not to annoy and agitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but just because it's you're sort of being over l'te'oven. You've got a weakness for this. So that sort of fellow can join our Minyan. Av lahachis, but if he's doing it lahachis to sort of rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a sign of anger, then afilu b'dover echad, even one thing that he does, then he would not be able to join the Minyan. Or he serves Avodah Zarah, or he is Mechalel Shabbos publicly. He's got a din of a non-Jewish person, and therefore ein mitzdaref. So, when the Shulchan Aruch says that a person, the Avarian, can join the Minyan, that's only if he is doing averas l'te'oven out of his own desires, not lahachis. Good. Or he's doing avodah zarah, or he's being Mechalel Shabbos b'fahesia. That's what emerges from the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah then adds on, interestingly, and we'll come back to this in a second, but the Mishnah Berurah in Mem Zayim says, Lo nidu, they don't put him into cherem, afilu avera shechayiv oleh misa, even if he does an avera which is chayiv misa, whatever, there's plenty of them, whatever that may be. Vahatam, and the reason is, dichsiv ba'achon, when it says in Yeshua with achon, Chota Yisrael, Afal Pisha Chota Yisrael hu, a Jew who sins is still a Jew. Of Ikdusha Kohen, he retains his Kedusha. V'kas hanikra Karoim, the group of people that are called Karoim, Karaites, which I believe there's still a few of them around today, a few hundred, somewhere near Haifa, they've got their community. They only believe in Torah Shebichsav, not Torah Shebal Peh, which is an interesting topic. They cannot join the minyan. Because they only believe in Torah Shebichsav, not Torah Shebal Peh. So they don't believe in a basic tenet of our faith, and therefore they can't join the minyan. Okay. Now the question really is today, how do we look at Mechalel Shabbos? You're in you're summer holidays, you're away in a provincial town, and you could be go to a minyan. It's an outlying place. Shabbos morning, you're 9, and all of a sudden, a guy walks in, and he takes the couple out of his pocket, puts on his head. There's no eruv in this place, or he's driven to shul. Well, how does that work? It seems from just the first reading of the Shulchan Aruch that it's a problem. However, there are two schools of thought: a lenient one and a more stringent one. The lenient school of thought is, and many poskim, they consider that most Mechalel Shabbos nowadays are Tinoka Shenishbu. They are considered Tinoka Shenishbu, they're children that have been held captive, and they've just been deprived of a Jewish education and experience. Now, that's an interesting question, because the Tinok Shenishba of old, 100 years ago, was a child of 5 years old when his sort of forced conscription into the Russian army, and he's been torn away from his home, and he's been put in the army for 20 plus years. So he's never had a proper education, never experienced, growing up in the Jewish environment. So I understand that's a Tinok Shenishba, or literally a Tinok even younger than 5 years old. But does that apply to secular Jews today? And is there a difference in Eretz Yisrael? A regular secular Jew, a Chiloni in Eretz Yisrael, you could argue, well, does he know about Shabbos? For sure he knows about Shabbos. So how does that work? So the Chazon Ish is often quoted. This is in Arachaim Simon Pei Zayin Sivkot Yudalet. This is just a line from the Tshuva. Or Kamoi Kain, listen to what the Chazon Ish says. Oyson Sha'avosov Pirshu Midarchei HaTzibur, a person whose parents have left the Darchei HaTzibur, the Jewish way, and he didn't have a Jewish education, didn't go to Jewish schools or yeshivas or whatever. He's got a din of Yisrael, and therefore he could join the minyan. So too the Igros Moshe, Nishalti, im yesh b'shas hatchak v'tzarf Mechalel Shabbos l'asora, v'lochein im atom mispalim yesh mokum lahatzil l'tzarfam. The guy's coming to shul to daven, you can join him in the minyan. So for Kaddish, for Kedusha, for Baruch Hu, you can join him to the minyan. If he listens to the Shliach Tzibur, then he can listen, that you can be moitzim, etc., etc. Now, that's one school of thought. Rabbi Elyashiv, by the way, explains the tshuva of Rabbi Moshe a bit more. That's on the top of the next page. This is in his, Rabbi Elyashiv gave shiurim to Balabata, he gave to lots of people. It was whoever went. There's very chosh Tamdei Chomim there. Occasionally I went to that shir, I went to Saddleback just to see it. So you have a man, Rabbi Elyashiv, in his late 90s, when you're in the later years, and he was giving shir, and they have records of all his shiurim. So you can get them. So these are his shiurim on brachas, on the brachas chafala from a base. He brings Kol Dover Shebekdusha Lo Yepochas Me'asora Ya'afilin Lo Migzer Shov Meraglim. Like I mentioned, we learn it from Meraglim, like I began earlier. V'lefi zeh hechiach be'Igros Moshe she'efshe b'shas hatchak l'tzarf Yisrael mumel minyan. V'raya also. What's from Moshe's raya? Shehari adas hameraglim kofru be'ikka. Where are you bringing the raya from? Where do you know minyan from? You're running it from the meraglim, and the meraglim are kofer be'ikka. But it says in Erech and Tesvav, she'amru klape shmai ki chazok hu mimenu. They say that it's too difficult for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring us into the land. And that's the source for Tefillah Ba'asara. V'imkein, ein hanilmad, the thing which is derived, can't be stricter than the Melamed, the source. And just like the source are dealing with people who are koifrim be'ikah, so therefore the derived can also be b'mumrim, those who deny. You're going to tell me that the Meraglim did tshuva. The Gemara says in Soita, is the Meraglim also tshuva? Mikol Makom, says Rabbi Elyashiv, Hai krod the bodler metoich ha'eda, Ari koidim she also tshuva. You're bringing the source from the point in time before they did tshuva. So that's not a problem. V'imkein shapi afin legabi memorim, v'afal pike nir lachriya lahatil etzarfom, b'shas atchak godel. In extenuating circumstances, you can join the Mechalel Shabbos for minyan. That is one school of thought. The Chazon Ish, Moshe, etc.
You could argue in the Meraglim way went. They were Anashim, they were good. It was drawing.
So there's a lot of discussion about exactly that. 2 or 3 years ago, we had on one of the points on the Parsha Shir was exactly that it started off in Parsha Shlach, Chodei Wanashim Chashuvim, and Rashi says Kasherim, and later Rashi says Rishoim. But the trouble is, Rashi says we makish talicha to the Yetzirah, and just like they came back with a negative and as Rishoim, they left as Rishoim. So how do you reconcile that stira? So the Maharsha Aram Ben Soita deals with that question. That's the big question. But the point, to answer your question, the point in time where we bring a raya from is where they've left already, and before they've done tshuva. So definitely at that point in time, they're Rishoim. So that's Rav Moshe's raya. Now, interestingly, the Shevet HaLevi, and amongst many other poskim, he takes a more strict view. And amazingly, when I was researching this, in a tshuva written in Tovshin Lamed Hey, which is 1975, it's always interesting to see who's the shoyl. So most of the time you don't know who it is, but here we know very well who it is. Take a look at the second box on the second page. Kvoid Yididi Hayaka Harav Hagon, Mezakes Harabim, the Merein Harav Pinchas Roberts Shlita. How interesting. Yes, sadly, recently Zatzal. Pinchas Roberts, Rav Bekele Kadesha Hendon Adas Yisrael London. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah. So I just brought that in just for nostalgic reasons, right? Hareini Meishiv Bekitza. Now he asked, Pinchas Roberts asked a fascinating question. Asher Toma Olai Shekosavti Begilin Hashach. Roberts wrote to Reb Vosner and says, you wrote, Reb Vosner, commenting on a shach in Yeridea, to Mechalel Shabbos v'kolshkein shoyen nosu isha nochris, someone who's Mechalel Shabbos, or Rachman is married out, ein misabin olov, you don't sit shiva for him. Kol shele noda b'bira shemesa b'tshuva, unless you know for certain that he did tshuva. So he married out as Mechalel Shabbos, you don't sit shiva. V'kos of v'chloidei, i.e. Rabbi Roberts, Toma, he said, really? The imkain is spatel kol zuchus avelis mirov mishpachas b'chutz la'aretz. You've just destroyed Shiva in many, many homes in Chutz La'aretz. Shari Poretz Meruba B'chil Shabbos V'Kil in I don't want to say, in broader Anglo-Jewish circles, where sadly many people are not Shomer Shabbos. So how does that work? Now that's not for now, right? That's the topic in hand. But what Rav Vosner says in that tshuva is that someone who is Mechalel Shabbos, he's not got a din of Yisrael in terms of making a minyan, and he cannot join the minyan. And he says it again in Chelik Beis, in Siman Kufayim Beis, the next paragraph. V'af shero isi, I saw in the Darkei Tshuva, he brings which is brought by the Ben Zion, she'ein Mechalel Shabbos tizmanenu nechshavim mumarim gemurim. There are those lenient opinions that say Mechalel Shabbos nowadays are not considered mumrim. They're just doing what they saw at home. That's the lenient view. I don't buy that. It doesn't. First of all, I don't think it applies in Israel. How can you tell me that he's like a 5-year-old kid or 3-year-old kid who's sort of been taken away by the Russian army and he's never been exposed to anything Jewish? You never have some secular Jews. You're going to tell me he doesn't know what Shabbos is? Of course he knows. So you see, interestingly, there are two schools of thought about how you view a Mechalel Shabbos nowadays. The lenient view is you look at them as a Tinnik Shenishba, and the more stringent view is no, they know better. And the Piskei Tshuvas, which is a contemporary sefer on the Mishnah Berurah, he's got, if you look at the final paragraph, he has a very nice sikkum and a very nice summary. I haven't brought the whole thing, but let's look at a few paragraphs. Chilonim, secular Jews who have left the traditional Jewish way, and they were not raised with Torah mitzvahs. One shouldn't join them for a minyan. However, many of the giants, I've just quoted a few, but many of the Gedolei Poskim, they write to include them as part of the minyan of a prat, especially, listen to this, it's hard to say that they're rejecting their heritage. What are they doing now? They're coming to shul to daven with the minyan. Now, yes, maybe he took a couple out of his pockets, but at the end of the day, they're coming to shul. I once had, many, many years ago, before I was aware of all these this big topic, I went to discuss it with Dan Erentrow, in Shabbos for Shlema. And because I was in a certain place, it was an outlying place for a certain Shabbos for some, and I was there for the Minyan, and I didn't know if there's going to be a Minyan of Shomer Shabbos. And I said to the Dayan, look, by the time people come, we're a small crowd for that one Shabbos, and then people come much later on for Musaf or whatever, for Kriyas Torah, for Musaf, but for Shachris itself, I don't think you've got a Minyan. If you have got a Minyan, it's going to be not without Shomer Shabbos. And maybe I'm better off davening, at the earlier time, the correct time at home beforehand, and I'll go there on time, and I'll take a sefer and sit at the back, And he got very upset with me. He says, "Who says they're not Shomer Shabbos?" I said, "Dime, because I see them come to shul where they're taking their couple out of their pocket, or they're bringing a walking stick, or they're driving to shul." So he took the line of Ramosha and the Chazon Ish by saying they don't know any better. They're Timik Shenishba. You can't call them Mechalel Shabbos, which is a very interesting line. A very interesting line. And then if you look at this, Aval Ein Advarim Amurim, so therefore you can join them. Even though they know that the Torah doesn't allow you to drive on Shabbos, some bring a raya that if they're embarrassed in front of their Rav, that's a siman enough that they're not Mechalel Shabbos properly.
But there's another section of people who have been brought up religious, who reject it. Yeah, and let's say for them, so there's no
Next paragraph. Aval Ein Advarim Amurim. This, the above applies only that they're only with people who have sort of a basic emun in Hashem. They give respect to the religious people. They do milah on their kids. They will, if they divorce their wife, they'll do it with kadas for kedin, and so too get married. To exclude. Now, how do you define exactly what you described? Okay, we'll see. But to exclude those who mock Shomer Torah, they refuse to give their kids bris milah, themselves, they marry people they're not allowed to marry, or non-Jewish people, the Kolshkin are reforming by conservative, certainly reforming conservative people, he says. Torah, they reject it. But again, is it the stump people? Is it the rabbi of the community, those who know better? So you can see that this is a bit of a minefield. And you're right, those people who grew up and then went off, how do you look at them? Which category do they come under? And what about, they're not mocking, but they're just, themselves, they don't have the emunah. But they're not loyeg ledosim. So in summary, the Shulchan Aruch, the starting point is that the Shulchan Aruch says an Avarian is nimna leminyan asara. An Avarian can count for the minyan. What is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, only someone who's over the te'ovein, who succumbs to temptation, the cheeseburger, etc. But someone is lahachis, they're not, or Mechalel Shabbos for Hesya, or Avodah Zarah. And the question is nowadays, how do you define the Mechalel Shabbos? And there are two schools of thought. The more lenient school of thought, Chazon Ish, Tikkun Moshe, etc., is to include them. They've got a status of a Tinuk Shenishba. But there are other Gedolei Poskim who say not. And certainly it's Israel. And the Piskei Teshuvos brings a whole host of Poskim and Shayos and Teshuvos that deal exactly with this. And perhaps exceptions could be made for those who mock Yiddishkeit, etc., and perhaps they are not included in the more lenient opinion. But you can see it's a big topic and a bit of a minefield. Okay.